A wave of commits is on the horizon.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thanks for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com and get matched with your expert. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all day, every day today. We're going to do something a little bit different later on in the show. There's a whole lot of news from pro Huskies, Huskies around the program, outside of just the football team, outside of the recruiting world. So we'll get to that. A little bit of great Osobor talk. Alexis DeBoer is just one of the best players in college softball already, and she's been there for a month and a half at this point. We'll get there. Byron Murphy got a huge bag. We'll get there as well. But Lars, it's something you and I have been talking about off air. You alluded to it on Twitter a couple of days ago. There is a wave of commitments on the horizon. A bunch of crystal balls are starting to go in for guys that were on campus for junior day, and none of them are more important than four-star quarterback Brady Smigiel.
All right, let's see if I can do this real quick here. The press hat.
The press hat for all the audio-only listeners out there. Shout out to them.
Tip of the cap. No, and this is something, so to clarify, I guess for the preview of the second segment here, that wave tweet was, Kasani Giles told me that the UW staff wanted him to start this, call it Cali wave. Originally, even though he's at IMG, is originally from, went to Alameda, is originally from Southern California. A bunch of Southern California guys came up. Obviously, Brady Smigiel being arguably the biggest. Again, you can talk about Bod, you can talk about X, Y, and there's a good problem to have when you can say who was the biggest on campus.
Right.
But physically, stature-wise, everything that, kind of signifies how good this class could be. Brady Smigiel has always been the one where I thought he was going to come in December, to be honest. I'll peel back the curtain on that. I thought before he, decommitted from FC, I thought it was going to be a straight flip. Turned out, I think he handled it the right way. Again, he hasn't committed to Washington yet, but again, all the crystal balls are coming in on 3, 247. Everybody's predicting that Brady Smigiel is going to end up at Washington, as we said on Sunday, and as we've said for the last probably 2 months. And I think this weekend was a summation. It was okay, we're finally going to come in, make it official. Then when I come back from my official in June, I'm going to be a recruiter already. I'm going to be committed at that point. And that's just kind of how it's always seemed to be building. And it's a massive statement for Jimmy Doherty to already have demand. And now the question is, how long does Brady sit, or how does that situation work with Dash and Tristan and the rest of the quarterback room? But this is exactly what you needed, a true top-of-the-line quarterback to build this class around.
Absolutely, where I wrote about him a little bit over on Huskies Wire. And one of the things I said was he becomes the cornerstone of this class right away, where you're still looking for bigger pieces, right? You hope you can get Keeney Pepe in the boat. You hope you can get Derek Coleman-Bruce in the boat. Bob Militalo, obviously, another one that you mentioned a minute ago, where all of that is great, but as we all know, everything in football always starts at quarterback. And having a really, truly, Dash Bailey, Tristan Keeney-McMillan, those are awesome pieces to have, but you want to bring in elite talent year in and year out. And I that's not to say that I don't think Dash and Tristan can be that, but with Brady, it's the recruiting ranking is a big part of that. Recruiting rankings are not everything. We make that very clear every chance we get. But when it's somebody who is ranked as the number 6 quarterback, I believe, by 247 Sports, and is, top 75 overall right now on their rankings. We know he's a 5-star on Rivals, but the 247 Sports composite, all those sorts of ones are usually a little bit more, they're better when it comes to the overall rankings of guys. So that's why we say 4-star. We got a couple of questions about why we haven't said 5-star in that regard. It's usually just because of the rankings we choose to go off of. But he is absolutely a 5-star talent. And that's a really important part of this, right? Where you look at it and, hey, DeMond's got at least this year and at least next year. He could come back in 2027 if he wants to for his senior season, depending on how things play out. But having a successor plan, whether that be Dash, whether that be Brady or Keeney-McMillan, whoever it is that steps up and takes that backup job, is going to be a huge benefit for this program. And thinking about what Brady brings on the recruiting trail, which is a huge point of our discussions when it's been to revolve around him, is, whether it be Deshaun Rideau, Brian Bonner, Vance Spafford, Daniel Odom. You can go down this list, Caleb Tufua, Sam Utu. There are so many names that you can talk about and say, hey, it's very clear that Brady has a bit of a gravitational pull because of his status and because of his talent. And if, we start to see some of those guys that were alongside him, those blue chip prospects, start to, commit to Washington just behind him, that's all really, really important for the 26th class where, Jedd obviously wants to improve on where he was in 2025.
Yeah, well, it's about just you can't let the room dictate what you're going to do. You can't say, oh, because we took 2 last year, we got to take a guy that, might not push Dash. It's like, no, Dash would want someone to say, okay, cool, they're still bringing in the guy in 26. Cool, I'm ready to compete. Yeah. And it's the NFL development. It's what college football used to be, where you might have to sit for a couple of years. And then if you want to transfer after you're a sophomore or junior and you've been backing up for a couple of years, okay, so be it. Like you decide that down the road. You don't dictate now, well, we got Dash and Trish. We don't want to scare one of them off because, X, Y, and Z. First of all, I don't think either one of those guys would transfer before the season's over. Like, so I think you're staying as a freshman, and then if you come in next spring, I'm assuming Brady would enroll early. Kind of a hunch on that one. Quarterbacks seem to be enrolling early at this point.
Yeah.
So if Brady's there and you're starting 26, March, April 26 with those 3 quarterbacks, okay, cool. And then if one of them decides to transfer, one of them is going to stay, and then you'll sign a guy in 27, get a JUCO guy, or whatever you want to do. So the point is you have a healthy room to where there's not a fall off. There isn't that precipitous, okay, now we need to go and get a transfer guy because our freshman's not ready. You want to have somebody kind of waiting in the wings, pushing guys, and it's about Jedd's NFL development. Like you want to be developed in Jedd's offense to where if you don't win the job, you still spent 2 productive years at Washington learning an NFL offense, learning how to be a quarterback, learning from DeMond, learning around Brady, guys like that. Where at other programs, yeah, you might play early, but you're not getting pro coaching, and that's the sell. That's why you're emphasizing because it's not just hey, it's the NFL. Because again, how many coaches you can go hire a bunch of coaches who have former NFL experience and say, hey, we got a bunch of former NFLers, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a pro run program. Jedd's seen Bill Belichick, Jedd's seen Sean McVay, all these coaches. And he's like, okay, I know how to develop quarterbacks. I know what offense I want to run. Now in college, how do I marry that together to where I have a starter? But then you also need a backup. Or in the NFL, it's kind of like the backup is just the scout team guy who you really want to just make sure you have a safe option, a good $5-7 million option, but not one where you're like, hey, you're really going to be pushing for him and you want to trade in a couple of years if you're not starting.
No, absolutely. So I kind of want to get back to a little bit of more of what he brings on the recruiting side, because I think you nailed that. So before we move on here and talk about some of the other guys who could follow him, I think that one thing that's really important to mention when we talk about Brady is the Jedd Fisch sales pitch, where in 2025, I don't want to say they struck out on a whole bunch of top guys because you still were able to pull in Siale. You were still able to pull in Dylan Robinson and a couple of other truly high-end talents that could make an impact early on in this program. But you were missing like that top-tier guy. And I think Siale is a top-tier guy. And I know you do as well, but that wasn't necessarily the national perspective. Getting somebody of Brady's caliber, who's a, depending on where you look, top 5, top 10 player in California, that's different. That is a different level of raising the bar. And, all the names we mentioned a minute or two ago, all of a sudden that resonates with those guys as well. It's, hey, Brady chose Washington. Yeah, that's certainly somebody who, like, I list that they're already in my top 6, my top 8, whatever, and I want to take an official visit there. But now I'm really going to be considering them heavily because if Brady is sold on that NFL style of development, whatever else it might be, that's something that could work out for me really, really well also. And I'm curious to see how that's going to play out, Lars, because it's not just Deshaun Rideau. It's not just Brian Bonner. It's not just those guys. There are a bunch of prospects that could be following him very, very shortly. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at TurboTax. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live, full service, real-time updates, only in iOS mobile apps. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So, Lars, there are a whole bunch of places we can start. We sent out a list to our insiders about a whole bunch of guys who aren't just going to be on this list, but other ones that seem to be very, very close. We've talked about a few of them on shows past, but that's just, a little hint and some shameless free pub for our Locked On Huskies Insider program, which is down in the description below. Go check that out. But the first name that we need to start with is the obvious one. I mean that respectfully because he's got the 247 crystal balls and he set a commitment date. And that's 3-star modern-day defensive back, CJ Lavender.
Another part of that Cali wave. And when you think about modern day, you got Dash Beerley, you got Marcus Harris on offense. There was a few guys who defensively, Sean Scott was another one who came up from modern day, I believe. And you look and think like, okay, you got the offensive side of the guys. Now can you get some of the defensive guys? And I think, John Richardson, and it kind of gets back to that, hey, you didn't strike out on those guys, but you didn't necessarily get the guys you wanted. CJ Lavender is one that they clearly want. And that's, to me, I think, an important sign where right after his visit, where I know he had some other schools and potentially other official visits already said, the fact that he's able to look at Washington and say, like, this is the place that I potentially want to be, like coming just off an unofficial visit weekend, that is a massive statement for the staff.
Absolutely. And it's something where I'm really curious about how he fits in this defense, because I think him and Kasani Giles are very, very similar players, and I like their film a lot. I think that he might be a little bit more of a true nickel than Kasani is, where Kasani's got a little bit more film at outside corner. And when I watch both of them, I just say, I love the way they attack downhill. I love the way that they show great instincts, not just from the nickel position, but from safety as well. So they have just that full field vision at times where, it's something we saw a lot under Steve Belichick. I'm sure we'll see some of it under Ryan Walters as well, where guys will line up at outside corner, they'll line up at nickel, and then they'll rotate back to safety in just a disguised coverage or different things like that. So I think that that's something that has been emphasized in a really intriguing way with these guys on the recruiting trail, because another guy I wrote about over on Huskies Wire, I think I called it reckless abandon. If not, I used a similar term, and I really wanted to, because that's the way he came downhill to attack against the run. And it reminded me a lot of Miles Bryant, where I just love the way where I don't want to say he's undersized. He's listed at 5'11", 170, but he plays way bigger than that. And he attacks downhill against the run. He plays very, very physical. And it's something that I don't want to knock Jordan Shaw because I think he's just a different brand of player, but it was something that Jordan Shaw didn't necessarily provide in the same way that Alex McLaughlin would this year at that position, or Rashawn Clark, or CJ Christian if he lines up there, or even Dyson McCutcheon, who is a lot of fun to watch against the run at times. But I think that, if assuming CJ commits to Washington, where this is a big-time guy. He's got 28 offers. I know Miami is on his final list, Oklahoma, Stanford, Texas A&M, and I think USC rounded out his top 6. I could be wrong there. And then Auburn was a school that offered Georgia, Tennessee, Penn State. He had a lot of big-time programs in pursuit of him. So a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's just, a mid-tier 3-star guy. But it's about the tape. It's about the offers. It's, hey, Georgia was interested in this guy. Hey, Auburn really liked him. Tennessee. Like, there are big-name schools that were interested in his services, which makes this a big win for Washington, assuming it comes to fruition.
This is the type of win on the recruiting trail that we kind of hinted at yesterday, where don't let Ohio State come into the West Coast, or in yesterday's case to Washington. But it really kind of extends to California, because when you look at, I think it was about 17, 18, 19, somewhere in that ballpark, is when Ohio State, Alabama started really pushing for some more West Coast guys. That's when the Najee Harris is, the Tua Tagovailoa is. That's when that ray really first started, and that's where schools on the West Coast, USC, or honestly in this case Washington, need to lock down some of those guys, and that's how it starts. Where you might not get every 4-star or everything like that, and rankings again are great, but aren't everything. It's about also it's the whole package. It's the school that he comes from, modern day. They offer a list 24 plus. and the schools on that list. You're not talking about, Albion Christian, Kent State, things like that. Where I get no slight to either of those two schools.
You called me out for throwing strays at Akron and Ball State yesterday, by the way. I'm just throwing that out there.
No, and you're absolutely right. I mean, a stray is not warranted there, but just, again, two examples where you're not necessarily, worried about them coming in. But it really also kind of speaks to, we talk about Washington, where you're going to get maybe 5, 6, 7 guys from Washington. How many are you going to get from California? You're probably thinking at least twice that. And this is kind of one of those guys where you look and say, if you want to Smigiel and get the top end of the class, that's good. But there's also some of those, mid-tier guys who are going to end up playing above their weight. The comp that I would probably have for CJ height-wise, that you look at those measurables, this is Elijah Molden towards the back end when he was played more in that nickel role, where he's again good against the run, good physical guy doesn't necessarily have the most imposing physical body, but plays above his height and plays above what he's measured at.
So let's talk about another similar guy in that mold, where a whole bunch of offers from a whole bunch of big-time programs, but still rated as a mid-tier 3-star, but are guys that are really vital to building depth in a program. And that's Landen Miree, 3-star tight end from Ohio. You and I talked about him the other day because we loved seeing the FaceTime with Zach Taylor. That's a lot of fun, just the interesting little recruiting tidbits that we don't always get to see. So that's a lot of fun, and you enjoy seeing that, but it's that also just goes into, hey, we think this guy is really important, where, we talked about Florida State, LSU, North Carolina being some of the teams in the mix for him. And he's got, I think, 25 offers, the number last time I checked. And Washington has certainly flown up to near the top of his list, where he's one of those guys that the more I watch him, the more I say, all right, if that's somebody who obviously spent a lot of time with Brady Smigiel this weekend, if Brady really likes and Brady wants to get in the boat, you find a way to get him in the boat.
So I was thinking about this actually, as you mentioned the Zach Taylor thing. What's not to say that wasn't Jordan Paopao? So
sure,
Drew Sample, Cincinnati Bengals tight end.
That's fair. I was like, oh yeah,
that just dawned on me as we were thinking about. Like, you know what? Actually, wait, because you have Jake Browning, who's the quarterback. That obvious makes sense. Former Washington guy. But then Jordan Paopao is the ultimate tight end connection there, where it's, hey, you know what? Now, two different types of tight ends, Drew Sample and Landen Miree. But I think when you're Jordan Paopao and Jedd Fisch, like, that's why you have Jordan, because he's got so many guys to the NFL. He knows how to do all types of bodies, where he had Hunter Bryant, he had Drew Sample, had Will Dissly, like all three different types of tight ends all ended up, at least for a while in the NFL. The former two obviously sticking. Hunter had some injuries, didn't necessarily come to fruition like we thought. But that's another cell where I just kind of thought of that. Where I'm like, hey, like, that's you have Drew Sample, you have Jedd Fisch, like, like that's all those things kind of tie together. And it's also, anytime you can get a kid from Ohio, I'll just say that, like, Ohio guy, like, they know how to play football. Like, a 3-star in Ohio, 3 stars are not all built equally. A 3-star from North Dakota and a 3-star from Ohio, not the same.
No, that's a really great point, because it's something you and I have talked about getting into certain hotbeds of talent, where he's, it kind of shows where I think he was like rated 16 or 17 in Ohio the last time that I checked. And again, he's rated in the 500s overall and has 25 offers. Like, that's in Washington. That could be a mid-tier 4-star. In California, maybe I think he might be somewhere in California. That might be not necessarily my best choice there. Arizona, Utah, Colorado, or some of those other states. All of a sudden, yeah, that's the number 2, number 3 player in the state with those offers and with that kind of talent. So that is really important. And the Midwest in particular, as Washington needs to expand its recruiting footprint, having a guy like that in the boat who could play early, depending on what happens at the position moving forward, that's really important. And the last guy that we need to talk about who got a crystal ball from Steve Wilfong is Siale, the edge rusher, defensive lineman, really, from O'Day.
Yeah, that was the one where when we went into this weekend, I put the over-under at 3.5. But I'll say this. I joked with somebody who I bumped into on the concourse. That's about all I can say. I was like, yeah, I kind of criminally set the over-under low. Like, yeah, I was looking back in hindsight. But to be fair, it was like, hey, how many from this exact weekend versus how many set officials? And then we credit the official visitors when they commit, those types of things. But I think, again, it's why you wanted to get the in-state guys and the out-of-state guys all together. The guys that I've talked with, whether it's Kasani and Mason James and a number of others, Easton Taffa, where all of them coming from different parts of the country and the local guys converging on Montlake. Shout out Christian Capel. With that being said, it shows where it's like you're not just bringing in the local guys to say, like, hey, we're prioritizing you. It's all about the in-state guys. And then next weekend we're bringing all the out-of-state guys. No. We want all of you guys together here, get to know each other, because this is where it starts.
So I want to talk a little bit about that, because it starts on the defensive line with this class, obviously, right? You haven't gotten anybody there yet. Siale would be a really nice piece to start that, where Rado's the number 2 player in the state, 4-star on the composite, I believe, and is just one of those guys where I think that, when you talk about everybody being on campus for the junior day weekend, where it's kind of like, hey, this is the majority of our targets in this class. Where I know one guy who you and I really like, it doesn't look like he was in attendance, was Dominic Harris from Nevada, where that's a nice offensive tackling on build around. Obviously, Keeney Pepe is another one where, hey, if you're able to get that guy on campus at any point ever, and he was scheduled to attend until, we talked about that last week. But you can look at all that and you can say, I would bet you anything, Lars, that there was a point where all of those guys were in a room together and Jedd said the majority, if not all, of our 2026 recruiting class is in this room right now. The guys that we want, our top priorities. Maybe 1, 2, 3 other guys weren't able to make it this weekend for one reason or another, but the majority of the guys that we want to build this class around are right here in this room, and we want to sell that together. And, especially after we saw what happened on the defensive line last year, you want to promote that as much as you possibly can, and having a really solid player like Siale start that off, be the first one to commit, that helps with David Schwarzel, Bot Mulitalo, Derek Coleman Brusa, Anthony Jones, Sean Scott, Landon Barnes, whoever else, James Carrington. I'm just throwing out all the names at this point. And whoever else you say, all right, we want to prioritize you, we need you in this class. That's all part of that. And seeing a guy like that where it's, okay, yeah, now, hey, I got to know this guy. Maybe I went home and I looked up his huddle because I didn't know, how he played, what he looked like. Now I say, oh, yeah, no, that's a guy I want to play with. That's all part of that. We've talked about this, but that's all stuff that really matters. And we've got so much recruiting stuff that we're going to keep talking about over the next couple of weeks as more of these guys continue to commit. But Lars, there is so much news coming out of just the UW athletics world. We need to get to all of it. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Factor. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning. I recently tried their Protein Plus meals, and they were packed with flavor and kept me full throughout the day. The convenience is unbeatable, no prep, no mess, and just great food in minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off and use code LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code LockedOnCollege50 off at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. I was having trouble about where we might want to start this one. I think we have to start with the biggest award, and that goes to Alexis DeBoer. Shout out to UW softball. She was the Big Ten Player of the Week last week, takes home National Player of the Week from D1 softball this week after a stellar tournament, the Black and Orange Classic in Idaho. Lars, she's on a 10-game hitting streak. She has an RBI in each of her last 13 contests. UW softball is on a 14-game winning streak, by the way. And by the way, she's leading the Huskies with an OPS of over 1,300 and is third in the nation with 12 home runs. Yeah, she has been just on a tear all season.
I mean, it's just a winning team. Like, people will hate that I say that, but it's just like, what is synonymous with DeBoer? Winning. Like, crushing it. Literally crushing it. No pun intended here. But I think, and the difference between Alexis was when her dad talked about her, when they committed, it was like Heather Tarr, the camp that they came up, like everything. It was about the program. And so the fact that Alexis stuck and is crushing it, I think has been awesome because it's the place that she wanted to be, no matter what happened with the rest of her family and things like that. Like that's they're two separate entities in that realm. And when you think about what UW softball is, like you got Stevie Hanson pitching perfect games and you got Alexis popping off. It's like, hello, like softball is always still going to be king on Montlake, and that's just kind of the way it is.
So one of the things that we need to talk about with softball before we move on here is not just the 14-game winning streak, but the fact that this is basically a completely new team. There are only 4 returners from last season, and getting somebody like Alexis to step up and contribute alongside some other, new faces of the team like Sophie Mazzola, another highly touted freshman, Ava Carroll, who transferred in from Mount Hood Community College down in Oregon. there are a lot of really talented players on this roster. And shout out to Heather Tarr for building this thing back up after a whole lot of turmoil. And they had a rough start to the year where they go down to Arizona and they play Alabama and Arizona, both ranked teams. And they struggled a little bit. And as they, started to find their footing against, granted, weaker competition. I know Boise State, who was their last opponent on Monday, is a better team. I think they're 20-6 on the season. But this softball team has done a really good job of turning it around. And in what isn't necessarily the strongest conference in the Big Ten, I'm going to be keeping a close eye on them through Big Ten play. And Lars, another person we got to keep a close eye on because he's now one of the 3 highest paid corners in the NFL, is former second-round pick of the Arizona Cardinals and now with the Minnesota Vikings, Byron Murphy.
I think Byron would agree that redshirt year paid off.
Yep.
Just throwing that out there right now. It's one of those situations where it's, hey, I want to play, I want to do this, I want to come to Washington, learn behind some goats, learn behind some future NFL guys, and then go be one yourself. And it's exactly, I remember when Byron when he fell to the second round, it's always one of those criminal, Buddha was the same way, where it's second round pick, first round talent, and they both have played above it. And, Murphy's been one of those guys where just consistently doing it in the NFL, and now he's getting 22 per, and couldn't have happened to a better guy on and off the field, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things where you look at the numbers he put up this past season in Brian Flores' defense, set a career high in interceptions. I believe it was 7. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. And he also set a career high in pass breakups. It was 13 or 14. He has been just so impressive in the 2 years in Minnesota. I love that he went back there, where that's going to be a really big part of this, as he assumedly continues to thrive in that scheme where he's going to act as the number 1 corner moving forward in one of the toughest divisions in football, where you got to cover Amon-Ra St. Brown. You got to cover DJ Moore and Jamison Williams there in Detroit as well. You got to cover whoever might end up being number 1 in Green Bay. Plus DJ Moore and Rome Odunze down in Chicago. There's a whole lot going on in the NFC North. And for the Vikings to make a significant investment like that, instead of, spending it on Sam Darnold, where I don't mean that as disrespect to Seahawks fans. I just mean in terms of you spent the 10th overall pick on a quarterback, you might as well give the guy a shot and build around him and allocate that money elsewhere, is a really smart move on, on behalf of their front office, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. And also, it could really benefit Trent McDuffie.
Oh, yeah. Well, Trent's the biggest recipient of all of this because he's going to reset the market. You and I are both of the opinion of that. But it's one of those things where also you have to imagine, being in Minnesota, going against Justin Jefferson in practice is going to make – Byron's already good. It's he's already a more than above average player, but it's one of those when you go against elite receivers in practice and you go against elite, that's what makes elite teams great. And we can tie this back to college where when you're UW and you have, Marcus Harris going against Dylan Robinson, and you're laying the foundation for that future. That's exactly what you're talking about. Guys that are in the NFL going against great guys on the other side of the offense, and it's exactly. You could. We talked about this before the show. You could create an entire probably starting defense of UW guys, and the total salary is probably over what 250 million in terms of total defense.
Oh, yeah. Once the Trent McDuffie extension hits, it would certainly be over that. So I want to spend a couple seconds on the Trent McDuffie extension. You brought up J.C. Horn to me before the show, who reset the market with 4 years, $100 million from the Carolina Panthers. And it's one thing where I'm curious to see if and when Trent signs this extension, because I'm sure he wants to get it done and, solidify a long-term future for him at a place where he has proven he can be in the Super Bowl literally every year. So I think that's important, where Kansas City, they let safety Justin Reed walk. He signed with the New Orleans Saints just before we pressed record. And I know to a lot of the everydayers that doesn't necessarily matter. But I say that because another guy a couple guys actually who need to sign their extensions that have played at a really, really high level were the 2 guys picked ahead of Trent McDuffie in that draft. That's Sauce Gardner, who has been an All-Pro with the New York Jets, and that's Derek Stingley with the Houston Texans, where both those guys are presumably also going to be signing contract extensions at some point this offseason because they're eligible just like Trent is. And I'm curious to see how long Trent and his group, they want to hold out and just say, yeah, we're good. We want to see what happens there, where Trent has been snubbed of a couple of Pro Bowls, which actually does hinder the impact of how much he's going to be able to make on a long-term contract extension. So I'm curious to see if he waits and says, yeah, maybe I don't sign this year. I'll hold out another year, let Sauce sign his deal, let Stingley sign his, and then maybe we can circle back around to this next year. Or does he attack that and say, hey, I'm willing to still take a deal similar to what JC Horn got because I know I'm worth that and I'm comfortable being here in Kansas City. So just something to keep an eye on, but we got to move on. There's one more guy we got to get to. Great Osobor, all Big Ten honorable mention. His legacy on Washington, I don't know if it should be complicated because, there were some highs, there were some lows, and especially after what Danny Sprinkle has said about his team in the last couple of weeks, I think he deserves a little more praise than he's getting.
I agree, but also I'll push back a little bit for everything that Great has, been, impactful in a positive light. When Danny talks about the energy and the effort, not having it from everybody or not having a total buy-in, I don't want to say because again, Great was bought in, no doubt. I'm not saying he wasn't bought in, but you could absolutely see a decent amount of games this season where Great was not there or not in it. And I'm not just talking about the early parts of November where he was still battling that sickness and kind of working back into shape. It was even, and again, the Kepnong injury does not help. Having Great play the 5 does not help and all those sorts of things. But part of it is also just like, imagine what would have happened if Great, took the bull by the horns in a sense, and where you really, because again, he did have those, he had the Blake Griffin game, but it wasn't like there wasn't a consistent Great could really assert himself. There was more. He has more fouls and turnovers than he does points in a game. Like that's what it felt like towards the end of the season.
So again, down the stretch, it really wasn't as pretty, as the team started to shoot, which was the interesting thing. But early on, I think that's kind of what makes it a little tough where, you lose the Seattle U game and then things start to spiral there in January when you play the toughest schedule in the nation. But the reason I say I think he deserves a little bit more credit is the Frank Kepnong injury, which you mentioned was a big part of that. But whenever we talk to him after some of those games early in the season where he deserves a lot of flack for, some of the missed layups where, the NIL deal, all that sort of stuff where, we've seen all that sort of stuff on Twitter where it's, hey, he wasn't finishing layups. He was missing this. He was missing that. And Danny talked about that as well. But as we kind of saw non-conference and even the beginning of conference play out, without Frank, the amount of attention he got paid in the paint, game in and game out, and when DJ Davis wasn't making threes, Makai Mason didn't finish, didn't have the January and December really that he did in late February, early March, where he was on fire from deep. I think that those are things where you can look at that and just 3-4 years down the line say, Great led this team in points, rebounds, assists, and steals. Like, yeah, those are things where you can certainly tip your cap and say, you don't want to see UW in this place moving forward in terms of the basketball program. But at the same point, I think that he deserves a tip of the cap for the 1 year and everything he did give.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm bagging on the kid because again, I will say,
100%. Yeah, I
handled it great, and he was always good with the media in terms of even after a loss, he was never a pouty guy. It wasn't he was never that. But it also just does kind of when you said hey, he did lead the team in X, Y, and Z and B. So did Markelle Fultz, I'm pretty sure.
Sure.
Markelle Fultz had a pretty dominant, statistical season, but it wasn't, the greatest in terms of collective, which is kind of what sours the, overall opinion.
Exactly. Where it's a similar thing where, Markelle, you don't look back at that team and say it's Markelle Fultz's fault that team lost. Exactly. Where there were a couple of losses where, Great, like at the end of the Oregon game, I don't know if that's the best shot that he took at the end of the game there at the end of regulation. But there are a couple other ones where it's, hey, yeah, Great did everything he could, and they weren't hitting shots. They weren't doing this. They weren't doing that. They weren't completely bought in, which are all things just to think about at the end of the day. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to every day who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell. So you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please, if it's 5-star reviews, it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.